I never noticed that, but I see what you're
If I may have your attention, please. We're going to ask that everyone file past the families so that they can acknowledge you here today, and then we're going to ask everyone to please be seated. There are more chairs coming in just a moment. While we're waiting for the extra chairs, if I could ask everyone to please take a moment to turn your cell phones to their silent mode before we begin, would be greatly appreciated. Rabbi Isaac Serrata and Cantor J. O'Brien will be officiating. And again, in just a moment after the chairs are brought in, we will begin our services.
Please don't be shy. Put them out.
death has taken our beloved David J. Greenberg. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there's lamentation. In their tears, there's loneliness. Lost in sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Heal them, O God. Be with them. For David's love that united us in life in which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path, and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and are now a precious remembrance. For all these things and more, we give our thanks to God. So in this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures. They bring us the ever-new message of God's nearness. They tell us of our kinship with our Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. So we read words that have been passed down to us through the ages. Psalm 23 is probably the most famous poem in the world. It's been translated into every language. Whatever language you find it in, it gives us the same message. The message that God gives us a soul when we're born, makes a home for that soul after we die, that we dwell in the house of God forever. And then it tells us that all of us at some point in our lives will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's the price that we pay for loving other people, that one day we'll have to mourn for them. But the key word in that phrase is through the valley of death. You can't go around it, you can't skip it, but you can get through it. Step by step, day by day, until one day you're no longer in the valley, you're back in the heights of life. And so we remember these ancient holy words. They're printed in the booklets that you got as you arrived. I invite you to join with me as we read them. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So I said Psalm 23 has been translated into every language, but it's at its most beautiful in its original Hebrew. So we hear the words of Psalm 23. Adonai roi lo echsar milodei sheyarbitzeni alemei menuchot yenaleini nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'magelei tzedek yancheni b'magelei tzedek למען שמו. גם כי ילך בגיא צל מוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומימינך techa emoyen rachamuni. Daruch lefanai, shulchan neged sarerai, nisham tav Hashem en roshi, kosi revayai. Ach tom ach esed yirefuni, kol yemei chayai, kol yemei chayai, nishavti bebeit Adonai leorech yamim. Adonai roi lo hechsar, Adonai roi lo echsar. We read two familiar words from the book of Ecclesiastes. They remind us that for everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Indeed, this is a time to speak, a time for people to share their memories and their feelings in this moment, to tell us a little bit more about David. It's my honor to call on members of the family to come up and do that. Elaine, I know how hard this is to do, but I know you really want to do it. So, Elaine, please come up.
Thank you all for being here today. David would be honored and a little embarrassed to have all of you here to reminisce about him. Whoops, that wasn't in the script. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. David and I met when we were just kids. He was 14 and I was 12. He used to wait outside my chemistry class at high school to make sure everyone knew he was my boyfriend. Can you imagine me taking chemistry? We were two kids who felt alone in the world and found strength and love together. We married young, just 3 months after I finished high school. He was on a short break from the Levi Chicago Navy Pier. We had 2 children, 2 years, Michelle and Steve. We had a good life together and built a family. David was proud of his family and grandchildren. Seeing, talking, and texting with his grandchildren always put a smile on his face. He got great pleasure seeing the people they've grown into, and he loves spending time with them and their significant others. We were very young parents, and that meant we were still in our 40s when we became empty nesters. So we had the freedom and time to travel a lot over several decades. We traveled the world all over, from British Columbia to Antarctica to Russia, China, Peru, Asia, and several trips to Anguilla and all over Europe, long before many of these places were common to visit. As a numbers guy, David would know exactly how many countries we visited and exactly when, but I don't. Whenever we traveled, I had to explore every market and try on dozens of outfits at the boutiques. He waited patiently, letting me do what I wanted because he wanted me to be happy. He took hundreds of photos on every trip. We have bookshelves of photo albums with David's labels. China 52301 to 6501. 3 albums from Southeast Asia in 2009, and albums from other trips. He loved running. He would run the quarter-mile track at East Bank Club over and over again, like a gerbil. He ran 2 marathons and several half marathons and enjoyed talking and laughing with his running buddies after a good run. David was a complex person. He was quiet, but he loved the people close to him in his unassuming, understated way. We made our world and walked through it together. He indulged my whims and supported my dreams. He loved my creative eye and quirky style, although he didn't always understand it. He loved me unconditionally, and I'm eternally grateful for that. We were very different people, and yet we found our path together for over 65 years. David could tell you how many days we were married, right down to the second. Dee, I will miss you. You told me at the hospital that you thought we would have more time together. I wish you were right. I love you. Goodbye.
Psalm 121 says, I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. The protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection. The sun will not strike you by day nor the moon by night. God will guard you from harm. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. I'd like to turn to the younger generation and ask his granddaughter Sarah to come up and share a few words.
It's a hard act to follow, Grandma. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sarah, and I am David's oldest granddaughter. And I'm so grateful to have had my grandpa in my life for 32 years. Not a lot of people can say that. And it was truly a blessing. To everyone who knew him, which is a lot of people, you knew that he was an incredible guy, but he really was an even better grandpa. So today I just wanted to share a few things that I loved about my grandpa. The first thing is that I loved his voice. I think he had such a thick Chicago accent, and I just loved listening to him talk and the way he said certain words, and I'm really going to miss that. I loved how much he made a point to remember all of the events in our lives, big or small. He would always send a text or call wishing you good luck before something, and then a text or call afterwards asking you how it went. I loved that he loved taking pictures. He took pictures of Grandma, he took pictures of his grandchildren, of the flowers in Grandma's garden, And even sometimes I would say, Grandpa, I can send you that picture. And he would always say, no, he wanted to take his own photo. I loved how he would cut out articles from the newspaper that he thought would interest his children, his grandchildren, and he would save them until he would see us, and then he would give us these articles that were always pretty on point, actually, to our interests. I loved his dry sense of humor, even if sometimes his jokes were so dry that, to be honest, they went over my head. But I would laugh a little anyways because I knew that it made him happy to tell those jokes. I loved growing up and going over to dinner at Grandma and Grandpa's and just sitting in the living room with him, watching the news and listening to him tell stories and memories about his life with Grandma and his kids and his adventures and all of their travels. I loved how much he loved Grandma. He never hesitated to share how lucky he was to have her and to share this beautiful life and this beautiful family with her. I loved how into dates and the calendar he was. He would tell you it was the anniversary of something, and he would tell you exactly how many days it had been since then. Direct quote from my last birthday. Happy birthday. How does it feel to be 11,232 days old? I loved how much he loved the Nathan's hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July. He would watch it every 4th of July, and so while I personally found it quite disgusting, I would also watch it every 4th of July so that we could discuss it afterwards. And most of all, I loved how much he loved his family, and even though he was a man of few words, we all knew how wholeheartedly we were loved and how much joy we brought him. Grandpa, I love you so much, and I will miss you and all of these wonderful qualities that made you the amazing grandpa that you were.
Psalm 90 teaches us that a full life is 80 years, and 10 are given strength 80 years. David would be the first to recognize that he beat that by 5 years. And it also tells us that we should make our days count. And as you just heard, nobody counted days quite like David. But he did make them count, made them count in every way that matters. So we read these ancient words. O God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return us to dust. You decree, return you mortals, for in your sight 1,000 years are as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. You engulf us in sleep. We are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak it flourishes anew. At dusk it withers and dries up. The span of our life is 80 years, and 10 are given strength 80 years. But the best of those years have trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily. We are left in darkness. Teach us therefore to number our days that we may attain a heart of wisdom. Turn to us, O God. Show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. I'd like to ask Michelle to come up and say a few words as well.
So thank you everybody for being here. As you've already heard, my dad was a numbers guy. So if he were standing here, and I am not a numbers math person, so this might not be right, but he would tell you that he lived 31,306 days, give or take some leap years, and depending on which birthday you counted, because we all celebrated his birthday January 7th, but for some reason his birth certificate says January 8th, which I still don't understand. But he liked to tell us that he shared a birthday with Elvis and David Bowie, so there. My dad was strong-willed, determined, stubborn, very stubborn, witty, clever, proud, and private. For several years now, Steve and I have been trying to get my parents to move out of the house because they have a full set of stairs up and a full set of stairs down. And my dad would not budge, even though he could barely walk. He was not leaving that house. So my one regret actually is that he went in the hospital Labor Day and he never made it back to his beloved house. And he, like he told my mom, he ran out of time. My dad was a loyal friend, father, grandfather, and father-in-law, and most of all, a devoted, doting husband. He met my mom when they were young teenagers. He was still in college when I was born, and then Steve a year later. For nearly 70 years, he brought my mom flowers every September 30th, which is the anniversary of their first date. As a dad, he was a little mix of sweet and stern and sentimental. I was trying to think of things from like when we were kids, which is a long time ago. And I remember he'd take us tobogganing, like with those wooden chutes, and I was always really scared, but he made me feel safe. And he would take us to the Blackhawk games, and he actually started me on my path as a White Sox fan. And my husband and I are White Sox fans, and we've probably in our marriage gone to, I don't know, a few hundred games. And my dad still would, bring home a winner, Michelle, bring home a winner. And then he'd follow up with a text afterwards, well, you didn't, you failed. But anyway, and then just something else that was just so funny, if you'd ever been to a Passover Seder with my dad had a just like classic, ridiculous rendition of Haggadah and Echad Miodeh, which I can't begin to describe to you, but it was truly priceless and always a good laugh. That was kind of his, don't make me do it, but then of course he loved the attention. So my dad was a pretty small man. He was 5'4" at his peak. So he was, of course, too small for high school sports or anything, but he found his athletic path as an adult. He didn't learn to ride a bike till he was probably, I don't know, in his 50s maybe. But then he and my mom would take bike trips together. And then he became a runner, probably in his 40s. His favorite running partner, Marvin, who's here, was like over 6 feet tall. So the two of them would be running down the Greenberg Trail, and I can just picture my dad on his little short legs trying to keep up, with Marvin, but he did it. And like my mom said, he ran a few marathons, a few half marathons. He also was one of the original founding members of East Bank Club when it first opened. And so for years, my dad would be up at, before 5 in the morning, pulling out of the driveway in the cold dark, so he'd be there when East Bank Club opened. Like many men of his era, his work was a huge part of who he was. He was a CPA, and he worked until he was about 80 years old. Zizek and Greenberg was a small firm with basically 2 partners and 2 staff people who pretty much worked there their entire careers. They had a lot of longtime clients, including a few University of Chicago professors who had won the Nobel Prize in like economics and stuff. So for a while there, I was working at the University of Chicago at the medical center. And so when my dad came to campus to meet with clients, we'd have lunch at the Quadrangle Club. And I remember he'd meet, just casually introduce me to these Nobel Prize winners, which I was pretty darn impressed. So as an adult, while I see myself as somewhat of a combo of my parents' influence, I've always been more like my dad. I'm the quiet one. My brother's the more outgoing one, like my mom, like our mom. So I'm a writer. He's a litigator. And I can trace some of my habits and traits directly to my dad, some of which, of course, my daughter already mentioned. So he always wrote notes. He carried an index card in his shirt pocket with a running list of to-dos. I also have lists everywhere on Post-it notes, paper pads, etc. And like my dad, I also kind of procrastinate doing what's on my to-do list, which is not the best trait I inherited from him. He taught me to be cautious, probably overly so. But he also loved a good adventure, especially when he and my mom traveled together and they truly explored the world together. Like Sarah said, he saved articles for us. I also save articles for my kids. I check on people when they're sick, when they're leaving from a trip, when they're returning from a trip, or going through a challenge, because that's what my dad did. I still call or text to let my parents know when our plane has landed. or the kids have arrived wherever they're traveling to, because I know if I don't, my dad would call me up the next day in this sort of like passive assertive way and go, did Sarah and John make it to Norway? Did Cal and Gabrielle make it back to Denver or whatever, So I'm like, yes, Dad. But I knew, so next week I actually have a business trip, and he was reminding me just a few days before he passed, Michelle, you haven't sent me your itinerary yet. And I'm like, seriously, Dad, you're in the ICU and you're worrying about, what flights and hotels I'm staying at, but that was his way of showing that he cared. I will forever be grateful that he got to spend a really joyful weekend with all his grandkids and their partners at Alex and Erica's wedding. Thank you. He was really not feeling well at that point, and he put a smile on his face and powered through, the pain and discomfort he was feeling, so that he could spend time with, his grandkids, me and Mike, Steve and Dory, and Dory's family, and that was really treasure time together. Over the last year, and especially the last month, my mom would tell me that Dad's putting on a good face for you. He seemed to rally when I came to visit, which I really appreciate, whether it was sitting in his spot on the couch in the den that he never seemed to leave the couch, or in the hospital. Yes, Dad, you did run out of time. I'm going to miss your smirky smile, your gentle nudging of me. I love you, Dad. Goodbye.
Sharing a birthday with Elvis on January 8th is definitely better than January 7th when you share a birthday with Millard Fillmore. Actually, don't ask me how I know that. Yeah, I did just check to make sure my memory was right, but my family actually celebrates Millard Fillmore's birthday. So, yeah. A modern poet has written, birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a growing from stage to stage. From childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion and grief to understanding, from fear to faith. From defeat to defeat to defeat and to looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage made stage by stage, from birth to death to life everlasting. I'd like to ask David's grandson, Ty, to come up and share a few words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ty, Steve's middle son. I think that's the third grandchild, I believe. Number's right. So I'm glad Sarah went before me, because as we were thinking about kind of what to say when we were meeting with the rabbi, I had all the grandkids were really quiet, and Grandma was like, speak up, like share some stories, come on, say something. And what I had mentioned is I think the reason none of us had stories to say about Grandpa is because he was always so hyper-focused on us and caring so much for us that we really didn't have time to hear about him. And, maybe I didn't put it the best way, but really what that rang true to me was selflessness. And if I were to boil my grandfather down to one word, it was selfless. And something that I love is coaching basketball, and something that we bonded over later in his life was my coaching and talking about my team. So I wanted to read an excerpt from a book written by Coach K, one of the greatest basketball coaches of all time. Selflessness means that you will do what is best for the team. Jimmy Valvano once told me, a person does not become whole until he or she becomes a part of something bigger than himself or herself. And so when I read that, that immediately made me think of my grandfather. His team is really this front row, his family, but all of you. And to him, it was always not about himself or the I, but it was about the we and the us and the you, and being something, really being a part of something bigger than just himself. So I sit here and I don't have lots of funny stories to share about my grandfather. So instead of speaking about him, I wanted to take one more opportunity to speak to him. So I wrote this letter for you, Grandpa. Dear Grandpa, we really missed you this weekend. It was a weekend full of family and one that you really would have loved to be at. It was filled with good food, deep laughs, some rough football, and lots of family time. Finally, we had some opportunities to talk about you, though, which was really special. I learned that you actually didn't ask Grandma to the prom. Shame on you. We looked through your wedding pictures, and I actually thought you looked more like you were going to prom than a wedding at that time. But it seems like you were somewhere between myself and Kyle at that age. We haven't been able to nail down which one. We talked about your escapades at the Super Bowl, which I think my dad might get into. And then we talked about the 80th birthday celebration in Las Vegas that we spent singing Sweet Caroline into the wee hours of the night on a party bus in Vegas, which kind of 82-year-old does that. On Friday, we shared a beautiful Shabbat dinner at your house and then came here for a great service. On Saturday, we watched Michigan beat up on Indiana, which you would have hated because I know you were always secretly an Indiana fan over Michigan. And then on Sunday, all the cousins watched what was another disappointing Bears game. The whole weekend culminated with a beautiful family dinner at where other than La Scarola. But who am I kidding telling you all this? Because I know you were there in spirit watching all of it. Grandpa, it's been hard for me to accept that there will never be another handshake, another dinner, or another chance to talk about the Bears. But even more, you won't be there the day I get married, or to get to meet my grandkids. But you have taught me more than you know. You've shown us all that life is bigger than just oneself. You've built a beautiful family, and one that we're all going to carry your legacy through for generations to come. I love you, Grandpa.
Nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision and grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death all reveal the divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under divine protection we abide. By God's love we are comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts. Fill our spirit with abiding trust. Steve, you ready?
I have an old joke when that happens in court, and I always say it's my mother calling. But I know it's not because you turned your phone off. All right, well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve, David and Elaine's son, and I want to thank you all. I'm old, I need readers. I want to thank you all for coming here. The fact that there are so many people here, you know, when we were talking about this and where to have it here at the temple, we're talking about the big sanctuary. Thank you. The big sanctuary, the chapel, or you know, were we going to have enough people? And the fact that so many people are here is really a testament to my father. The fact that so many people, care about him and care about my mother. And when we were setting this up, the order was set forth and I had to go last, I did not know that I was going to be following so many great words. So I think that's a testament to my father, the family that he has left behind, and not really left behind because he's left himself in everyone. We were sitting around today and we were talking about, who has this quality and who has that quality and who has that little bit of him. And it turns out that everyone has a little bit of him to carry on. So he made an impression on each and every one of us. And the impressions are very different. Just my sister and I are very different people, just as Sarah and Callie are very different people, but they each have a piece of my grandfather or the boys, the same thing. So I guess, I'm a lawyer, so I guess this is kind of going to sound like a closing argument for my father. But I'm going to try not to be redundant. My father was an enigma in so many ways. He was a man whose early life was steeped in unmistakable and unthinkable tragedy and isolation, but he refused to be defined by it. His life story, it's not just a eulogy, but it's a tale of inspiration, a testament to human strength and determination. And I want to tell a few stories about his life that I learned. And I learned, like Tyler said, I learned all sorts of things about him this past week that I never knew. And I wish I had known, because if I had known those things, I think our relationship would have been different. And for that, I'm sorry. He had an extraordinarily difficult childhood. He came from a very large family. He actually came from a fairly affluent family, but his mother was on the outs with that family, and they weren't affluent. They grew up, it was he and his mother. His father died when he was just a young child, I think 5 or 6 years old, of what we would consider a routine operation, and so his mother was alone. She had 2 children, but his older brother was 8 or 10 years older, and he very quickly enlisted in the Navy and left my father and his mother to live alone together in a 1-bedroom apartment. So he had to work. He had to start working when he was a child, when he was, my mom says he was hanging outside of her classroom waiting for her to come out, but then he was probably off to go work whatever job he had to do. And his mother struggled, and all I ever knew, and I know more now, but I'm not going to get into it, but all I ever knew was when he was a teenager, when he was 19 years old, his mother died also. And he was all alone in the world. And my mother told us this week that when he died, they were dating, and she was supposed to go away to college, which I never knew. She was supposed to go away to U of I. She was going into a sorority and all of this, and she stayed home. And as she put it, she said, I had to take care of David. I mean, she loved him that much. She gave up her life dreams to take care of him. And his whole life, she did exactly that. They got married, as she said, they got married very young, 3 months after she was done with high school. She was, as we would say, knocked up or pregnant. Within a few months of that, and my sister was born barely over a year after they first got married. My dad was working in a shoe store. He was supporting a family, and he was going to college at night. And then my mom got knocked up again, and she had me. And my mom always told this story of how she's wheeling 2 kids in a stroller. And they weren't like the strollers they have nowadays, Max. And she didn't have a latte holder and all that other stuff in the stroller, or the fancy. So she's wheeling 2 kids, and someone says, "Come in and vote." It was the presidential election, and of course they were trying to get everyone to vote for Kennedy, so we wouldn't end up with Nixon. And they said, "Come in and vote." And she was too young to vote. she wasn't even 21 yet. And so my father worked in the shoe store, went to college at night, became a CPA, which was fitting because he was a mathematical genius, as people have said. This is one of his ties. We're almost all wearing one of his ties today. So this is one with all of the numbers on it. And he took the CPA exam. He got one of the highest scores in the state and very quickly started working. And something else I learned about my father this week, someone was talking about him not being a great athlete. He was actually a super fast runner, which he passed down to at least one of the grandchildren. But he got a letter. He lettered in high school, and my mom took out his letter the other day. It was a big A for us, and he was on the checkers. He was president of the checkers team. And for that, he got his high school letter, which he saved all of these years. People have talked about numbers and the numbers that he had, and he would do that. He would always send you numbers. You've been this for this many days, or it's been this many days since something else happened. And he would keep track of everything on little cards that he kept in his pocket. So he's in the hospital, and he's in a hospital gown. Unfortunately, he went in the hospital and he never left. But he got to the point where they let him wear his own clothes. So he put on, as he did, I think he only owned button-down shirts with a pocket. And he put on his shirt with a pocket. And all of a sudden you went to see him at the hospital, and there were those index cards in his pocket where he kept track of everything. So the number that I know he would have wanted to share was, at the time of his death, he had been married to my mother for 574,415 hours, give or take a few minutes, depending on what time you guys got married. He would never forget anything. He was in the hospital, and he was very, very sick at the end. We were in Israel. We left Israel on Saturday morning, coincidentally, unfortunately. And we left Israel, and we came back, and on Sunday we went to see him. And we sat there, my wife Dory and I sat there for probably 20 minutes. And he was completely out of it, and all of a sudden he woke up. How was the trip to Israel? Great, we did this, and this. It's too bad what's going on there. Yeah, it's awful. Okay, you can leave now. And it was interesting. That was the same thing he said to my sister. Those were his last words. Okay, you guys can go now. I'm all good. But that's how he was. He didn't want anyone to see there and watch him suffer. He would keep track of everything, not only for us, not only for my mother, but for his grandkids, and now for his grandkids' significant others. He didn't miss anything. He didn't miss a birthday. He didn't miss if I had a case that was important, he would wish you luck. He wouldn't miss anything. And he expected, frankly, the same from you, and if you didn't, you were in what we affectionately would call the doghouse. You'd be in the doghouse, and you'd have to wait till the next event, and then you'd dig yourself out. But he never missed any, and he never missed a family event. He went to the wedding a month ago, or a little over a month ago, when he was very sick, and he went to the wedding of Alex and Erica because, Dory's my second wife, and we have a blended family now, but he considered that his own family also, just as he considered he considered John and Kaylee and Joey and Carly and Gabrielle, the grandkids, significant others or spouses. He considered every one of them as if they were his own grandkids. And that also meant they ended up in the doghouse if they missed something. He was a little bit quirky on things, so not surprisingly, as an accountant, he was very rigid. He would leave the same train. He was a train person. I don't know how many of you are train people. Train people are kind of a weird thing. The train people on the metro, they sit in the same seat, in the same car, every day. God forbid they get there and someone else is sitting in their seat. They take the same train home. They do the same thing. And this was pretty much before iPads and stuff like that. And he would come home every night, and every night you settle, always use the back door. He lived in that house for 50 some years. I never saw him walk in the front door of the house, and he would come in, and he would put his stuff down, and he would grab his martini. Every day, he'd have that one martini, and I think that's a trait, maybe not the one martini, but the martini that he passed down to me. He had some other great, like cake and ice cream. So if you take nothing else from this, I want you to understand how to properly eat cake and ice cream. People eat cake and ice cream on a plate, right? They put it on a plate, they put the cake down, they put the ice cream down, they give you a fork. No, that's not right. Cake and ice cream is meant to be eaten in a bowl with a spoon. If you gave my dad cake and ice cream with a fork, take it back. Take it back and serve it properly. There's some other memories that I have of him, and I don't want to belabor all this, but we went to the Super Bowl in 1986, when the Bears actually did have a good team and a quarterback, and he wanted to go. He took me and my friends. One of my friends had tickets. We were all still in graduate school, so we couldn't afford to go, and so he took us all there, and he wanted to fit in, so he got drunk like the rest of us. And Friday night, he went to the bathroom. In New Orleans, some of the bars share bathrooms. So he turned the wrong way, leaving the bar. So now we had, a drunk guy. He was, 48 years old, and he's drunk in New Orleans, and he's by himself. We can't find him anywhere. We're looking. All of a sudden, we walk in a bar after maybe 2 hours, and they're standing between two basically, large gospel singer ladies. Is my dad singing chorus for some band on a stage in New Orleans? Shit-faced, but singing. And when I was growing up, and we would have tension in the house, my mom and I would always say, it'll work itself out that we're with the band. So we're like, David, you got to come with us. You got to go. It's time to go. And he's like, oh, no, I'm with the band. I'm finally with the band. I'm not going with you guys. And there were other good times. We went to the first Cub night game together. We went to Bulls championships, and we recently went to Vegas for my mom's birthday, which Ty touched on. But the best thing that my father always said that ever happened to him was my mother. And as you've heard, to his last day, he would do anything for her. He was tough. But it was sort of a tough love. It was just the way he was. When they first met, my mom in high school, as I understand it, was kind of like a greaser, right? She smoked, she wore leather, she was very popular, kind of like Olivia Newton-John, the Olivia Newton-John character, right? And my dad was, he's a handsome guy. He was no John Travolta, okay? So, but they met somehow, they say opposites attract, and they had it. And for 68 years they were together. For 65 years they were married, and there was nothing, that he wouldn't do for her. There was absolutely nothing. So, I've skipped through a lot of this because, I don't want to get too granular, but there's one thing, I've always said that when I give my closing arguments, I always give my best closing argument in the car on the way home after I lose, because I think of all the stuff that I should have said and I didn't say. And it'll be the same thing here, but there's one thing that I want to say, and some of you know this and some of you don't know this story, so this is probably the part where I'll cry. We were estranged for years from my parents, right? We didn't talk to them. We deprived them of their grandkids for many years. They would go to things and they would show up at the sporting events, and they'd sit way off in the corner and like, shoot, go, and there were lots of reasons for it, and I can't revisit that decision. But I felt bad because my dad was estranged from his family. When his mother died, his family came, and they were sharing this one-bedroom apartment. His brother was off in the Navy, and his family came, and they said, okay, we'll pay your rent for the next month, and then you're on your own, kid. Goodbye. And he really had no family at all. And I always felt very bad for that decision and for doing that. So in the spirit of my dad, probably not supposed to do this at a funeral, I brought a martini in a cottage cup. And I just want to raise a cup to my dad, and I want to say, to a life well lived, an enduring legacy that will live through generations to come, an enduring love for everybody, and I want to apologize. You want a sip?
You can leave it there if you want. In the Bible, in the book of Job, Job cries out in his sorrow, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mevarach. God is given, God is taken away. Blessed be the name of God. And ancient people were well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. So with Job we say, Adonai natan, God you have given. You gave us David, a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, God you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love as we say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. Let's take a moment for private prayer, meditation, memory. A moment to remember David, perhaps a story that you heard today, or a story that you have in your heart and your mind. We pause for a moment of private meditation. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. We've gathered here today to honor the memory of David Greenberg, and we've done that. His spirit has entered eternity. After this outpouring of love, there's not much more that I can add. After all, David was a man of few words, and we've said quite a few today. He was more than content in social situations to let Elaine do the talking. David would chime in only when a clarifying word might help, or on occasions when Elaine was telling a story and he thought he could tell it better. He was a lifelong Chicagoan. I once caught him watching a Cubs game. So I thought you were a Sox fan. He said, I am watching the Cubs lose. I have a slightly different picture of what Elaine must have been like as a child. I'm not sure about the leather, and that's not because I know you were president of SIFTY, the Chicago Federation of Temple Youth. Yeah, yes, you were definitely the yin and yang together, you and David. I do love that story. Did he ask you who he should take to his prom? Not you, right? But we didn't get into who you recommended, or what happened to them. Yeah. David did have those tough years when he was young. He knew what it was like when the bottom drops out of your life. He knew that bad things happen when things fall apart. It may have given him that rigid core and an intensity to hold things together. It was probably compounded when his mother died. Elaine, who tells me that she is as unrigid as a person can be, changed her plans to go to college and told her mother, the way I heard it, we need to take care of David. Elaine and David were married in their teens, were on their way to that 66th anniversary. It's an amazing story, an amazing life story. David certainly wasn't a bragger about anything except when it came to his family, particularly his grandchildren. David's immediate family had become so small for him, so it never stopped being a miracle to him to see his children and grandchildren grow. From that connection to Elaine, a marriage that David said was the best thing he ever did, to Steve and Michelle and the people he brought into his life, Michael and Dory, to the generation of his grandchildren and all the people that you have brought into his life, who he took on as his own. He loved each of you for who you are, and every moment of every day he felt blessed by that. He loved your work, whatever it was. He wanted to know everything about every new job, and he wrote it all down, kept it all here, so that he'd ask how that first day of work was, how it felt, how it went. David worked hard because a paycheck was one of the ways he showed his love. He may not always have felt comfortable using words like, I love you, but he showed it in how he provided for you. He showed it in the loving way he just enjoyed being with you, like in Las Vegas, where I don't think he had any particular interest in going to a Keith Urban concert. But he did enjoy watching his family enjoy the show together. He liked watching over the family, and he was often that man behind the camera, taking the pictures of Elaine and all of you and all the places that you've been. I was lucky enough, and I feel blessed, to have traveled to Israel with David and Elaine. I got to see the way they supported each other every day. I remember so well a marathon walk through Jerusalem on a Shabbat. David stayed with us through lunch, and then he went on about his way and went back to the hotel, because David liked to do things the way he liked to do them. But he wasn't about to try and find lunch on his own in Jerusalem on Shabbat. He had his own rules. He had his cards with his plans of what he was going to do. But his rules never kept him from being there with you. He would never say no to family, especially to his grandchildren. Getting married in Mexico, I'll be there. He loved sitting in a restaurant one Thanksgiving with an Emmy on the table, won by his granddaughter Kaylee. He was enjoying as people walked by the table wondering, who might this famous gentleman be? But he was also paying tribute to your accomplishment so that anybody would know how amazing his family was. And in that, David was a role model for all of you. He taught you what it means to be a husband. With his love of Elaine and how he supported and protected her, you saw what it means to be a spouse. With the way he cared for all of you, he showed what loyalty means, what caring means, what it means to be family. It's fitting that your last time together was at that family wedding just a few weeks ago. David wanted to be part of that moment. Even the weird video dancing part, which I didn't quite understand. I can't imagine what he thought of it. But that last family photo that I saw from the wedding was a thing of beauty. He has a fantastic smile on his face. You can see in it how much he felt blessed just to be there. David has had some health problems for the last few years, but they really all came to a head recently. Though he was reluctant to leave the home he loved, he still managed an occasional dinner out, and the wedding trip, and big events like that. But in recent days, that became impossible. Though it is a blessing that he didn't seem to be in pain, still David needed regular treatment to deal with his cancer. And in the end, he spent about 24 hours in hospice care, maybe less, before he died. I saw him alive for the last time a few days before he was gone. It was a busy day, and I didn't get over to the hospital until after regular visiting hours. I used rabbinic prerogative to go and see him anyway. Hospitals are a little eerie once the visitors and most of the doctors go home. They're a little darker and a lot quieter, and David and I were able to have a few uninterrupted moments together. And those moments were quintessential David. He told me how much liquid had been drained from his lungs down to the milliliter. But other than that, he had no complaints. He asked me, "How's the temple going?" He asked me about my family. He told me again that marrying Elaine was the best thing he ever did. David was at peace with the end. He hoped he was going to go home to tidy up a little of his own personal bookkeeping, but he had only hope, only love for his children and grandchildren in his heart in that moment. He was sure that all of you would do great things. He was happy that he had helped send you on your way. We could have wished for more time, but I don't think we could wish for better. We are finite. And so in the boundaries of time, something David intimately knew from his childhood, we do what we can to bring something good into the world. David did that by growing his family and his community. A part of him will always be in the hearts of family and friends who knew and loved him. His memory will live on. May the memory of David Greenberg always be a blessing. Can you hear that song? May this be God's will. Amen. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember him. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. Our tradition really teaches us about two kinds of immortality. There is the immortality of the soul, the gift from God given to us when we're born. It goes back to God when we die. And then there's the second kind of immortality, which we've talked about today. That's what we bestow on the people we love by telling stories about them, by remembering them, by passing it on from one generation to the next. So long as you remember David, he has eternal life. I ask you all to stand for the ancient holy words of El Maleh Rachamim, the prayer for the immortal soul.
El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Mameromim, Amitzei Milcham Nechona, Tachot, Kanefei HaShekhinah, Im keroshim uteorim, kezor arakim mazirim, et nishmot David shaloch le'olamo, barachamim. Yostireim v'zedek afov ne'olamim, ויצרור ביצור חיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום משכבו, ונאמר Amen.
We'll continue with the words of the Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. It's called the mourner's Kaddish even though it doesn't mention death or mourning. Rather, these are words of blessing. Words that ask us to thank God for the gift of David's life. So the words of the Kaddish are on the brochure as well. You can join me if you like, and if you don't know it, you can simply say Amen. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah, b'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chaye echon uv'yom echon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, b'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'alamo ome omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shmei de Kudesha Brichu, Le'elo min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbahata v'nehemata, Damiran bi'alma vimru, Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabba min Shemaya, V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael vimru, Amen. Osei Shalom bimrama, Hu ya'aseh Shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn, and comfort all the bereaved among us. And let us say, Amen. You may have noticed we mentioned a couple of times a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate a birthday, and someone even mentioned, I'm not even going to remember who it was, who mentioned Sweet Caroline on a bus. Well, it just so happens that Cantor Jane knows that song. So we decided.
I think a lot of people know that song.
Yeah, I've heard it a few times myself. But we thought it would be appropriate to sing a version of Sweet Caroline here together today.
We can kind of fill the room with that love and joy that we share together in this moment of sadness. So if you know the words, feel free to join in. Where it began, I can't begin to know in, but then I know it's growing strong. And was in the spring, springtime became the summer. Who'd have believed you'd come along? Hands, touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you, sweet Caroline. Good times never seem so good. I've been inclined to believe they never would, sweet Caroline.
Yeshua. You learn something new every day. You can be seated for a moment. I think, Bill, you have some announcements.
Our services here are now concluded. The families invited everyone here to please join them for Shiva here at Makom Solo Lakeside in the receiving area. At this time, we will ask for everyone to please join the family in that area for the beginning of Shiva. Thank you.
Thanks.